Right then, good evening ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to the final of our inaugural lectures for this term. This is the sixth which we've had, and I can see some familiar faces out there, people who may well have been to all six of them, and congratulations to you if you have. Anyhow, this evening's is going to be given by Stuart Fairclough, our Professor of Physical Activity Education. Stuart joined us about 18 months ago from Liverpool John Moores University, and he is associated with that part of the Department of Sport and Physical Activity, which is the undergraduate program in PE and school sport, which is the largest recruiting program in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Stuart has got a long and distinguished research record, and I think he's going to talk you through the journey there. His particular area of expertise, though, brings together some of the concerns of the three faculties at Edge Hill, because there's sport, there's education, and there's the implications for health of activity and inactivity as well. So it's particularly appropriate, I think, and I see people from all three of the faculties. In fact, it brings a number of strands from the inaugural lecture series together this evening. So Stuart has agreed that he's happy to take one or two questions at the end. So without any further ado, let me hand over to Professor Stuart Fairclough.
Thank you, George. Thanks all for coming, and for the university for giving me the opportunity to come and talk for a period of time, hopefully not too long, about some of the research work that I've been involved in over the years. It's great to see so many colleagues here, past and present, research collaborators, friends and family, and thank you very much for taking the time and effort to come and see me today. I've been to quite a few of these inaugural lectures, and particularly since I got a professorship in 2011, I've kind of played through this moment in my mind many times about what it would be like and what things I might be saying and stuff like that. And I've always kind of wanted to have an optimistic feel about that, be very excited about the prospect of sharing some of the things that I've been doing, but at this moment in time, it's probably one of the most terrifying, actually, moments that you can probably imagine, because you've got all the people in front of you who you really want to impress, either in your professional life or in your personal life. And when I look at this first row here, that is a really tough crowd. So professionally, I've got the boss, and I've got colleagues around there, and then I've got the other boss at this end, and I've got some of the other people who keep me on my toes all the time on a regular basis. So I'll try and hopefully get through what I want to get through, and I hope I can do the occasion some justice. The title's pretty long-winded, so apologies for that. I'll try and unpack it as best I can. I have been through this and rehearsed it a little bit today, only a little bit though, and it's probably going to come in around anywhere between 30 minutes and 1 hour 30, so we'll just see how we go, okay? What I do know is that the doors are locked, so you're in, that's it. So, yeah, this revolving door thing. So what I want to talk about really is the kind of research journey that I've been on. I'm going to talk about that first of all. So I hope you'll kind of indulge me a few kind of trips down memory lane, if you like, because I think it's important to get to the point, explain how I've got to the point of where I am actually now. And then this revolving door bit is talking about the kind of back and forth experiences I've had through physical education and also exercise science, and kind of my thoughts on how those two things are linked. So I'm going to talk about those, and I'll wrap with some maybe reflections on some of those particular issues. Now, it's usual to end these kind of talks with thank yous to a lot of people, and I've got every intention of doing that, but what I also want to do is kick off with a couple of thank yous. So I'm going to start off by thanking my mum and dad, because they're the people really who've moulded me to be the person I am today, and I'm a big believer that we are the products of our environment, and the social environment is a particularly important environment particularly for children and young people. So, and I was no different. So I like to offer thanks to mum and dad give me unconditional support in the things that I wanted to do in life. They've always been there to listen, always given advice, and also let me choose my own path, even when that path maybe wasn't maybe a great decision in the first place. So I almost didn't get here. I spent 2 years working at NatWest Bank after I did A-levels, and it was a terrible, terrible decision, worst thing I ever did. But at the time I was right. But you kind of learn from your mistakes, but then you get the support of the people around you, which I did, to actually find my way back to what I wanted to be doing. So Mum's not here at the moment. She passed away a few years ago. So my one regret is actually not seeing me reach this kind of point in my professional career, but I like to really dedicate what I'm going to say tonight to her. And no doubt she's looking down saying, don't worry, son, it'll be all right. So, the journey. 3 bits to the journey. School was a big influence, and I'll talk about that. It's very central to what we do in PE and school sport. My university kind of life was also very important, and it really led me, really streamlined what I wanted to do. So I'm going to kind of start on this side and work my way across. And as I said, I will be taking myself down memory lane a little bit, and hopefully some of you can kind of buy into that. So let's start then. So beginning for me in terms of what I do now for a job was at school. And at primary school, like maybe many of you, my memories are kind of running around a lot and running after a ball, and it was always hot, it was always summer, and it was real good memories. But then I went to high school. I went to high school in the early 1980s, and I had no idea what to expect. It was just about the big school and what would that be about. But I had an older brother, in fact, but he can't with us today. But he was 5 years my senior, so he'd been in high school in the 1970s, and he told me some horror stories about physical education and PE and the teachers that he'd come across, and what a terrifying experience it all was. And that seemed to make sense to me, because I like running around and doing sport. How could it be so different? So I was a little bit apprehensive. Now I'm just going to, this might be a little bit slow, but it will appeal to some people in the room. I know this because you love this kind of clip. But it's just going to set the scene, if you like, for maybe where I was at when I was entering high school and what I thought it was all about.
United strictness. Wait, let me slow. See, striking. No, Charlton today, all over the field. Do go for striking. Of course, Charlton's not going to turn the ball. You should tell me about football. No, I'm standing. Anyway, against Lord North. Open the door. Manchester United versus Spurs in this important 5th round cup tie here at Old Trafford. And it's the fair slightly bowling Charlton to kick off. It's like working my life. What's that for, Sue? Sack work, lad, sack work. Ain't that one to be a bandit? Give this, lad, give this.
Okay, so that film was released in 1969, and the tyrannical Mr. Sugden probably wasn't too far away from some of the stories I was hearing from my brother, and I won't name the school and I won't name the teacher, but he was just a sadistic man by some of the things I heard was going on. And so I was a little bit apprehensive about going to a big school because I was worried about all this kind of stuff going on. But positively, when I got there, I found it was totally different. So it really changed my outlook, because I'd suddenly discovered from kicking a ball about, or maybe that being the extent of what we could do in primary school, I was suddenly exposed to all these different activities, all these different sports, encouraged to do well in them, and encouraged to participate fully. And you know, my dad would tell you that probably most nights of the week I was home late because I was doing stuff after school and stuff at lunchtime. You know, whether it be football or basketball or orienteering or swimming or athletics or badminton or rugby, etc., we were always kind of doing something. And so, don't take any of these pictures on your cell phones, by the way, some of you people, all right? So we were always doing stuff, and it gave a great sense of accomplishment, of course. But what I really take away from that is that some of the teachers that I had for PE, yeah, they were kind of strong characters, and they were one or two might have shown kind of bullying behaviours in some respects. But in the big picture, they wanted us to do well, and they showed interest in us, and they were interested in our development. And they were inspirational role models in many senses. And it really got my mind thinking about, because it's dead difficult when you're a kid, and you know, my son Ben is 13, he's doing his options now, and it's all about, well, what are you going to do later on? It's, how does he know? How do we know? But at that age, for me, leaving school, I'd kind of got it in my head. It's something to do with sport and PE. I hadn't quite worked out what it was, but it set me on a kind of trajectory that I really wanted to carry on through. Now, around the same time, when I was about 15, back end of school, my teachers at school really encouraged me to kind of push my athletics, and I joined a local athletics club, which was Wigan Harriers. And that was a real turning point for me, because the stuff I did at school was great, but it was almost playing at it. And then I was all of a sudden in a kind of a serious sporting environment, and I was fortunate enough to be coached by a guy called Chris Butler. It was Chris there, and Chris was a farmer, lived in Multidimensional. He was an ex-prison warden, so he was kind of hard as nails, spoke his mind. He taught me a whole new vocabulary of swear words that I've never actually heard since, in a lot of times. But the ethos in that training group was all about hard work, more hard work, but quite advanced training techniques in a lot of ways, and really pushing yourself with your teammates and group mates. And it was a really important philosophy for me, because it was all about challenging yourself and all about making sure that you're going to put time and effort into what you were doing. And it's very important that you make the best of it and you do the best that you can for yourself. And all that was to do with athletics. It really transferred for me kind of beyond that and into the other things that I've managed to do. That kind of single-mindedness, I guess, really linked into get the best out of yourself and be the best person you can be. So we hear these kind of phrases quite a lot. Mo Farah's catchphrase on his Twitter, hashtags go hard, go home. And we were doing that then back in the kind of 90s and stuff. It was all about you rock up, you work really hard, and then you get the benefit. And it's an important kind of philosophy, I think, to take through in whatever, well, certainly for me, whatever I do in my life, and certainly my two kids are probably a bit tired of hearing me saying stuff like that in their own sport. Don't argue with that. Okay. Okay, so that kind of set me on the track. And as I said, I had this kind of blip. I got a bit fed up with studying. I went to work in a bank, but luckily I got back on track, and I finally got to be where I wanted to be, and I went to study physical education on a BEd teacher training course at Liverpool John Moores University. And again, no pictures of this, please. It really opened my eyes to what PE was all about, because I was still pretty much a kind of team sport, athletics kind of person, but there's all these other attributes and skills and areas for development that I got involved in. So it was a really important time for me, one that I've kind of never looked back from. I wasn't the best performer in all of these things, so I'm sure Joe was really critiquing my front somersault there. It's not particularly well tucked and stuff like that, but again, make the best of what you got, have a go, okay? 6'3" people don't do that well at gymnastics in my head, okay? But aside from that, what it also taught me, because it was my first exposure to exercise science, because we had a strong strand. So through my degree programme, which started in 1990, coincided with the first year working in that university of a lecturer there, a probably 31-year-old Welshman, who's now Professor Stratton. I'm very, very honoured to have him in the audience tonight. So it's Gareth's first, if you like, job at John Moores University, and we were his first cohort coming through on the degree programme. And Gareth started to teach exercise science, linked it to health, and for me, I could see the connections. I can see how this PE stuff fitted in with activity, with fitness, with exercise, with health. So it's a really had a really big influence on me. We managed to kind of do things in the lab, and we managed to actually conduct some what I would say proper experiments as part of our dissertation work. So it was a really fulfilling time. So I'll just also mention this character here who unfortunately can't be here. Well, this is a long-time friend. This is Dr. Steve Atkins, who some of you also know. And Steve was Gareth's first PhD student. And we've since we worked together at Liverpool Hope, and we're you know, very, very strong friends. So another kind of big influence on me in terms of being able to share some of our kind of thoughts on this kind of work. So that's the old lab at Iron Marsh, and that's Owen, Gareth's eldest son back in the day, about to be put on the treadmill for an extremely strenuous peak VO2 test by the looks of it. I'll just say a couple of things now really around Gareth was someone who I met back at JMU. Then later on he became a PhD supervisor, and he's always been a constant in my professional life. He's been a great mentor for me, and always provided me with support, but always hand in the back, pushing me, and always challenging me as well. And challenging me when I was a PhD student, when I was working full-time as a senior lecturer and doing my PhD, and then doing other research stuff on the back of it. And always challenging the kind of intellect as well, and why you're doing this, and being critical. Really, really, really important. So that's been an important influence on me. Not always appreciated, so I remember going over to his house before my PhD Viva, and he went through a mock Viva with me. I thought, nice and relaxed, sit on the sofa, we'll just talk through the thesis. And he absolutely battered me with the most ridiculously hard questions I've ever heard in my life. And I didn't really maybe appreciate that well at the time, but when I come to do the actual Viva, that was a breeze with 3 examiners in the room. So that's been really great for me, and always kind of pushing, and allowed me to pick up on opportunities that maybe I wouldn't have got with some other supervisors. So it's really appreciated. And one of the things that's really strikes a chord if you work with Gareth is that there's always a sense of humour going on behind the importance of the work. So always there supporting us at international conferences. Well, I do remember one conference I was getting up to speak, packed auditorium, just looking out for a quick word of encouragement. And Gareth was somewhat it was somewhat busy at the time with other people from the research group, where they were all having a sweepstake on how long they were going to talk for and whether I'd go actually over the allotted time. So we have humour in the work, but it's always underpinned by the serious stuff and the importance of it. So thank you very much for your contribution and friendship over the years, Gareth. It's much appreciated. So after that kind of stage, oh no, we've not finished on Gareth. Sorry, a bit of flack for you now. Sorry. So one of the other things about Gareth, very briefly, was his fantastic fashion sense, and we always had a good kind of a good few thoughts in the PE group there about which particular coloured shell suit would he be wearing to our next practical session, and I'm glad to see he's toned down his fashion sense this evening. So. So moving on. So I eventually, we finished the course, got a job. Loved teaching in the school I was teaching in Wigan. This is me on my last day. But I always had it in my mind that the seed was sown, and I wanted to kind of move towards doing some extra kind of research work. So I went to do Masters in Sports Science at Loughborough University. Got a job at Liverpool Hope University after that, enrolled for my PhD. And then moved to John Moores in 2001, continued the PhD, full kind of teaching load timetable, teaching practical, teaching some of the sciencey stuff, teaching some research stuff. Real fond memories of busy days coming in, tracksuited up, out on the field, out on the pitch, teaching, jumping in the car with video camera, heart rate monitors, questionnaires, buzzing off to school, doing some data collection in school, coming back, teaching again in the afternoon. And it was full on all the time. But it's what you do if you want to achieve what you want to achieve, and that was philosophy at the time, and it's something I've always kind of kept with me. So I got my award, I got my PhD in 2005, and because really of all the other things I've been able to do in that time, I've been publishing as I've been going on, I've been doing some other research work because I've been presented with those opportunities. I made Reader in 2006, and then I made Professor in 2011. And my journey's taken me from an education faculty through to sports science school at John Moores, and then full circle of back to PE, back to here. So that's a little bit of the chronology, a little bit of the history. And I've talked for miles more than I wanted to, so I'm going to speed up a little bit for some of these next bits. Only a few more photographs as well. So we're talking about PE. So I'm going to just, if you like, just lay a few terms down so we're all happy with them. So there's a lot of physical educators in the room, and we won't get into the debate of what is PE because we will really not be here. We will be here all night if we do that. But essentially for me, I like this. It's kind of, we're trying to really make citizens who are physically, mentally, socially and emotionally fit, for want of a better term. But the key for me is that we do this through the medium of physical activity. And it's unique in the curriculum is PE because it's the only part of the curriculum which allows children to engage in these things, to learn these things. Okay, and I'll go beyond that really. It's really about the physical fit for me, but that's really central to the work that I'm really focused upon. So that's PE and how we conceptualize it. Just paraphrasing here, exercise science or sport exercise science. So it's applying scientific principles to the context of sport and exercise. And I'm particularly interested in combinations or integrating different approaches in order to do that. And of course, my focus has been on physical activity, particularly in children and young people. So that's the sciencey bit. And my thoughts on this is that really throughout kind of modern history, really, PE and exercise science have been inextricably linked. So in the broadest terms, both are about population health and activity and promoting that. PE does it through a kind of educational process whereby exercise science has a more, if you like, scientific method or an evidence-based approach to doing that. But essentially, they're both perhaps trying to help in the same kind of way. And certainly scholars in both fields have kind of made this point. So Jo Harris, who's she's a reader at Loughborough University. So back in the late 90s, probably, Jo was talking about the need for exercise science to be more involved, or PE to embrace exercise science a little bit more to understand how health can be promoted. And then flipping that forward, this was just from the PE journal, PE Matters this year, kind of looking at it from the other way, you know, so an exercise scientist, Gareth, you know him, Lynn, know you him, yeah, friend of yours. So someone else who's a scientist actually making the point about PE and exercise science and how they should collaborate more, all right, in this context, talking around fitness testing. So this link has always been there in whichever way you kind of want to look at it. And so for me, it seemed a sensible thing to try and talk to you about today. But of course, the thing which links both of them together is this, all right? We talk about physical activity a hell of a lot. The Department of Health kind of define it with this little model, which is sometimes quite helpful. So if you're not sure, physical activity is about expending energy or moving about, getting your heart rate moving. And we can sometimes categorize it into these kind of headings: everyday activity, active recreation, sport, and so on. But these don't always translate that well to when we're thinking about children and young people. So I don't know about you, certainly in my household, there ain't much heavy housework, gardening, DIY going on with the kids, to be quite honest. Right? We struggle if we get a bit of washing up done every now and then. But all right, so these definitions aren't always that useful for us. And we need to understand a little bit what kids' activity is. So I know it's an embarrassing moment, Because kids' activity can take many, many, many different forms, and the way they do it, the timing and tempo of it is very different. The characteristics are very, very different as well. And it's about playing, it's about exploration, it's about doing things with friends, it's about discovery, it is about sport as well, and it is about structured training as well. But it encompasses far more, perhaps, than that kind of model actually tells us about. Okay. So in order to study physical activity in children, we need to have an appreciation that kids' physical activity actually encompasses all these different facets. And we need to approach it in a different way to the way that we would approach it if we were working solely with adults. And then the last, if you like, part of this combination is about health. And we want to promote health. And health, we look at it in a holistic way, different dimensions of health. And I guess, from my point of view, the work I've done and talk about tonight is more about the kind of physical elements of health. So we've got activity and health, and we've got P and exercise science, and where they all fit together. So physical activity in adults has loads of evidence to support the fact that it's very, very beneficial for health. Okay, and the little quote up there kind of says it all. It encompasses benefits across many different kind of diseases. And I could really sum up this in a very, very in one simple slide here. And it's just showing us that basically the more active you are along this line, then the greater the health benefit, all right, in simple terms. And what's actually true is that the least active people, they get greater benefit even than the more active people. So a little bit is better than nothing, all right? So that's an important kind of, if you like, standpoint for the kind of stuff that I'm going to talk about now. Because while the evidence on the chart there is based on adults, the picture isn't quite as clear in children. But there is still a strong rationale for promoting physical activity in children, and it's about prevention. So this idea of preventing negative health outcomes, perhaps, or disease later in life by putting in place a positive and beneficial behaviour, which is physical activity. So it's been proposed with different pathways to reach this end point. And one is that we get people into an habitual habit of being physically active, and they maybe become physically active adults. And this is important because we know that in adults, physically active adults tend to be less at risk of chronic disease like coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease, and less likely to suffer premature mortality. So that's the kind of, if you like, the logic behind it. And what we also know is that if in physical active children, the likelihood of becoming diseased, getting stuff like type 2 diabetes or obesity or high blood pressure is reduced whilst they're children. And so that means the risk of picking up those kind of things when they become adults is also reduced. So there's a clear, if you like, theoretical rationale to promote activity in youth. Okay, and that's notwithstanding the other benefits of being physically active, more to growth development and social development and stuff. So kind of there's a strong scene set, but you may be sitting there asking the question, so okay, fine, but well, what's PE got to do with that here? So I'll try and kind of unpack that and what we'll talk about now. So when I was doing my PhD, I read this paper. It's published in 1991, but I read it, and then I read it again. Then I made loads of notes on it, and then I read it again, made loads of highlights in it, and I must have read it over and over, this thing. It was a seminal paper at the time by two scholars from San Diego State University, and they were making a case of PE's role in promoting public health. And this kind of struck a chord with me, and this thing about preparing children for a lifetime of physical activity, and at last the kind of penny dropped. I kind of got it. This is what this PE thing is really about. Okay, I mean, we could have the debate about PEs about many things. In fact, I'm an adjunct professor at University of Limerick, and I was over there in whenever it was, November, October, and I was leading a kind of online. What's it called now? It was a discussion debate around some papers, and this was one of them. And it was a 1 hour thing. People were Skyping in, and we'd spent 40 minutes trying to actually get around a discussion of what the purpose of PE is, okay, and it kind of cut into the time, and we could have that debate, but we're not going to do it tonight. But for me, the purpose of PE very much is squarely around this public health role and the importance of it. At the same time as well, I was reading the work of Charles Corbin from Arizona State University. Big influence on kind of my philosophy around this. And he coined this term physical activity education. He thought that was a better description of PE in terms of what it was intending to do. And I kind of like that. And I've kind of latched onto it, as you may have seen from my email signatures. That's always in there in my kind of title. So, and again, it was kind of developing all these things holistically in order to increase the likelihood of people being active over the life course. Okay, so this idea of PE really giving people the skills, confidence and competencies to go on and be physically educated. Well, that's all fine theoretically, but does it stand up in terms of the evidence? So there's a simple model here which just tells us about what the contribution of PE is to physical activity. We've got the kind of direct impact of what happens in PE classes and the indirect effects. So long term, what happens in adulthood, and short term as well. So we'll just take these in turn. We'll look at long term first. So that'd be great. So if we had evidence to say PE in school is very influential on what adults do later in life in terms of their activity behaviours, in terms of health, then that's a really strong foundation. Okay, a really strong case to make. But it's not been difficult studies to do because this is longitudinal research. You've got to track people over many, many years. Probably the most famous one was called the Trois Rivières study, which was undertaken in Quebec in Canada in the 1970s. And the children in the study received an intervention. It was daily physical education. And the activity patterns and health behaviours were tracked many years later. So 20 years later, the pupils who had this daily PE, well, the females were still more physically active at that stage of their life than counterparts who did not receive the intervention. Okay, didn't see any effect for males. And when you look at that study later on, another 10 years later, those effects have diminished. Okay, so there's not really strong evidence that PE experiences in terms of an intervention of that nature can have significant meaningful effects on adult participation. But a big reason for that is because the studies just haven't been done, I would suspect. Short-term activity, out-of-class activity, that's an interesting one. So what impact does PE lessons have on what kids want to do away from the PE lesson? This is Tony Hillen's work. So Tony's a former PhD student, now out in Monash in Australia, but she did some great work looking at different levels of influence of PE on out-of-school activity. And yeah, so what she kind of found was that, well, if kids from PE, if they perceive their ability to be higher and they've got good attitude, they see worth, they see benefit in doing physical education, then they're more likely to be engaged in physical activity out of school. So there is some suggestion that that kind of crossover to out-of-school activity actually exists. But it does depend, of course, on the actual curriculum content that the pupils are actually following. So I'll just kind of at this point, well, look at this in terms of curriculum. So this I think was the first paper in my PhD, just some survey research. So I'll look back on this, not with a great deal of pride, to be honest, because it wasn't the best quality research, and I'm quite happy to say that. However, the message was very strong in terms of the message that it portrayed, and it's still the second most cited article in the European peer review, and I think that's the case because the message in it is quite simple and quite strong. And the message that we had, what we did, we just surveyed heads of PE and asked them to say how frequently they taught, they timetable different types of PE activity across Key Stage 3 and 4, and it was males and females. And we categorised activities by team games, which are the predominant traditional form of PE, and what we term lifetime activities or lifelong activities. Typically activities which need only one or two people, less equipment, much more straightforward to do independently. And unsurprisingly, team games are the most prevalent type of PE activity in the curriculum, as we kind of thought they might be, and more so for boys. Now, why we looked at this is because what we also knew at the time is that young people's activity preferences out of school didn't look like that. They didn't do team games as often as they did these kind of lifetime activities, and certainly adult preferences for activity were focused around lifetime activities. So the PE curriculum at the time there wasn't really preparing young people for a lifelong activity because they weren't given exposure to the appropriate activities which they then go on to do typically after leaving school. Okay, we'll come back to that issue in a moment. The main thrust of the work that I did in this area was around the direct effects, and that meant a lot of work measuring activity in PE classes. And what I wanted to do was to springboard off the work that Gareth had done. So Gareth had done a lot of work in this period before me, using heart rate monitors and reporting the cardiorespiratory or physiological, if you like, responses to physical education in children, and also tapping into some of the kind of socio or pedagogical kind of influences on that level of activity. So it's an opportunity to kind of pick up from that work. And at the same time as well, there was also other studies who were looking at PE and what's PE's role in terms of promoting health and fitness. And this is one example from Georges Baquet's group in France. And this was the kind of research that probably got up the back of physical educators a little bit, because this is a study which showed that if you do certain types of PE activity, and this was kind of lots of shuttle running, lots of jumping activities, high intensity activities over the course of the lesson, then you're going to see improvements in fitness in the children. Not that surprising because of the level of stimulus in terms of exercise intensity. But what was missing there, that kind of approach totally decontextualised the educational learning element of physical education. So in a sense, they were trying to do these kind of training type studies, but happened to be within a PE environment. So I really wanted to move away from that, to report what goes on in PE, but also to try and see what the application of that information is from a teaching and learning point of view. So over the next kind of few years, try to challenge this kind of notion that if you do PE, then it's good for your health, it's good for your fitness. And we did this in various ways. So we compared how active kids were in different types of activities, how active they were between different ability groups or gender groups, and so on and so forth. Just come back, just one example of this kind of lifetime activity versus team game. So we looked at that as well, and so the kids wore, in this case, heart rate monitors. And what we find is that when you do team games in PE, you're really active. You're actually getting on for almost 50% of lesson time being physically active, and you do much less activity if you're doing kind of lifetime activities. So we kind of got this paradox, which I thought was quite interesting. So is it more important to promote the long-term stuff by putting kids into curricula where they're doing more lifetime activities, where they can learn these skills for later on in life? Or are we interested in the acute effects of running around in a team game kind of context and gaining a big kind of burst of physical activity that way? So it's always kind of interesting me, that one, and it's difficult to try and kind of level it out. But nonetheless, it was a kind of a live debate at the time. The flip side of that, we always think about PE as about physical activity, but we also know that in PE lessons sometimes there's a lot of inactivity going on, a lot of sedentary behaviour going on as well. So this is some work from a PE student, Rachel Mersch, and it kind of describes almost half of PE lesson time was spent being physically inactive. And in case you're wondering, these weren't non-specialist primary teachers. This was from secondary school PE taught by specialist teachers in the local area. So we've got this kind of massive range really. Some lessons are really, really active. Some lessons are really, really inactive as well. And we need to try and kind of understand what's going on there a little bit. At this period of time as well, I also, with Gareth, wrote 2 reviews of literature around this area. One focused on primary schools, one on high and middle schools. And these were well cited, have been cited over 100 times each. And the primary school one has just been updated actually last month. And it's interesting to see how things have moved on a little bit. But what we could conclude from this is that in PE lessons, typically, children engage in moderate to vigorous activity, which is the activity level where we can say there's kind of health benefits for about 30 to 40% of that lesson period. Okay. And it's always interesting to have a debate with the students whether they think that's a lot or whether that's a little and what do they really expect. But that was the kind of reality of that. So kids were active for about 1/3 to 40% of the lesson. And of course, we've got commonly observed differences across girls and boys, which is the same as we see in habitual activity. Now, that first review what was interesting, well, both reviews actually described the activity of the pupils by the type of measurement method that was used. So for those of you who are not familiar with the area, we can measure physical activity and different dimensions of activity in a number of ways. So we can use different instruments, different objective measures, we can use observation, we can also use self-report questionnaires as well. What was clear is that activity levels of the participants were different depending on how we measured activity. There were some challenges, so we started off using a polar heart rate monitor to measure activity, and all the kids would get one, they'd put it on, and it was very exciting for them. They became terribly distracted, the teachers weren't too happy with us, these things were flashing away and bleeping. We had to get them to press start all at the same time to start the lesson recording. And I actually recall getting Sue to make some elasticated cuffs to put over them so they wouldn't become too distracted. Then we had to download them one at a time, right? Big loss of data risk with these kind of devices interface. We moved on to this kind of system where it didn't need a watch, which was much better. This is an old style activity monitor. We used something called a TriTrack RD3. Gareth, you might remember the TriTrack. It was about the size of a massive scientific calculator at the time. I couldn't find a picture of it, but that was about that size. That's called a CalTrack. And again, these were big kind of things, big clunky things. And we also used paper and pencil observation to look at activity in PE. And we know that the way we look at activity will dictate, to an extent, what results we get. So we saw differences in kids' activity depending on how we looked at how we actually measured the behaviour. Now, fast forward a little bit to where we are now, and people like me still want to go and measure kids' activity in PE, but now, more so than ever, PE teachers are also doing this. Because there's now much more availability in terms of things that we can use to measure activity, much more sophistication in the technology. So we've got educational tools which will recognise particular movements, link to apps and so on and so forth. We can use mobile phones, and teachers are doing this readily. So it's a great educational tool. From the researcher's point of view, we're kind of using new flashy bits of kit, and we need to understand that data a little bit better. Because how we translate that information is a little bit different. So one of the things we've been doing the last few years is trying to invest a little bit of time in understanding some of the devices a little bit better, so we can actually make more accurate inferences about what's going on with the behaviours. So we've recently we've invested time, so we get a little bit of a result with that. So we did some research with the popular actigraph monitor, and there's big differences in how you report activity depending on how you deal with the data. Right, so that's kind of some ongoing work, and it's a bit of a tangent from the PE stuff, I guess. But this kind of technology and sensor devices aren't going away. They're only going to become much more prevalent. And so we need, as researchers, to really get our heads around how we deal with that data. Okay, so I mentioned interdisciplinary earlier. So this is a little section now. Some of the research that we did looking at PE and health from different perspectives. If you've ever done any kind of research with me or with Gareth, with kids, you've probably seen this model before. We call it the Youth Physical Activity Promotion Model, and it's a real nice way of understanding all the different influences on children's physical activity and their interrelationships. And so we kind of use it as a bit of a sounding board and really focusing on the psychological and the kind of biological influences on children's activity. So I'm going to run through some of these quite swiftly. So this was some of the first research really to look at some of the psychosocial responses in PE in relation to objectively measured activity. So this is some work which confirms clearly what we know in some respects now, that boys enjoy team games, is measuring enjoyment, girls enjoy individual activities. This was looking at between normal weight and overweight children, perceptions of enjoyment and competence in PE are different. So that raises issues for delivery and pedagogy and differentiation and inclusion, and how teachers deal with that. We looked at fitness, we looked at body composition. So this was obviously activity levels were measured in the school context. The kids came to the lab, they did peak VO2 tests, we did skin fold tests in the exercise science environment, and tried to look at that data in the whole, and kind of flagging kind of issues up that maybe are still going on now, in that, how fit you are doesn't really matter in terms of how much activity you do in PE. And that's a bit of a nod to the lack of intensity in some physical education lessons. So there are still things that are being wrestled with now, to be honest, and we were kind of flagging these things up a few years ago. But of course, the important thing is to try and change behaviours. And so to kind of use that information, which I've just flashed through, we developed a very, very simple intervention which involved the teachers. And we did it with girls, and we did it with individual activities because we know that was the preference for girls. This was a gymnastics class in Brookfield Sports College, as was. And all we did, we measured activity in one class and activity in the other class as well. But we asked one teacher to include physical activity engagement as an important learning objective. But don't change the content of what you're doing, but maybe modify your teaching style or behaviours or your class management style and stuff like that. We're also conscious at the time there was some suggestion that the more active you are, the more intense your work, and that might have a detrimental effect on how motivated you are to engage in the activity. So we wanted to look at both of these things. And so we measured this over about a 6-week period, and the red bar is the children who receive the PE activity lesson outcome intervention, and they were physically active overall by about 15% compared to the control classmates. But interestingly, the motivation of the children by a simple motivational questionnaire was about the same. All right, so it was a kind of a nice message, really, that we can actually get these girls moving quite strenuously, but they were really in the moment, they were enjoying it, and it had no detrimental effect on their motivation to continue. So to kind of hammer that point home, it was really important to plan for activity in PE. All right, and sometimes that point is still being missed, I think, in my opinion. Impact's a big deal in academia, and we do this research, but what's the real world impact, and trying to bring together education, exercise science in this. And so using some of those scientific principles has been really valuable. So you know, teacher behaviours and lesson contexts are pedagogical things. The activity measurement side of it is more from the kind of scientific element. So we've kind of done studies which have kind of combined the two. Developing tools, looking at specific elements of PE, using that kind of methodology. This is more recently, 2015, looking at different games models and the effect on activity. So the pedagogy and the delivery of the teacher is very, very much impactful on what the PE practitioner does, to the point where a lot of those messages are encompassed in texts like this, called Dynamic PE, which is co-written by a friend and colleague from Kentucky State University. So practicing teachers then use this as an instruction manual to deliver phys ed, particularly in the States. And this is Aaron, who kind of got introduced, went over to Kentucky in 2010. Had a great time there, did a lecture, went out to some of the schools, did some work with the students. Really good experience, and Aaron did actually come back over. The bad part of that trip, and I won't go into the detail, but I don't remember the Icelandic ash cloud. Yeah, I was travelling back that day. I remember just logging on the computer, a message from Sue saying, just check your flights. I was like, no, I'll be fine. Anyway, a 4-day trip lasted 10 days via Montreal, Nice, Paris, London, Wigan. But we got there in the end. So, but my point is, it's great to have like-minded colleagues in different parts of the world who are doing similar kind of work, and Aaron's really focused on his teacher education work in relation to getting training teachers to promote activity in the lessons. Okay, so PE, moving on, little quote there from Ken Fox, making the point that PE, kids have very limited exposure to PE, so we need to look beyond that if we really want to promote activity through school-based activities. And what we know is that children's activity across the day, so this is a typical timeline, and this is kind of minutes per hour. Well, during school hours, that's when children are most physically active. And so this idea now was kind of gathered a lot of momentum, and there's kind of formally, I guess the American term is this one, comprehensive school activity programming. But it's very, very commonplace now to try and focus on specific elements or segments of school to try and really maximise how active children can be in that particular environment. And it's great a great time to be involved, because this work is really live, and it's really flourishing with a lot of people in a lot of different places doing it. But that really made me think a little bit more about looking at activity more widely in children and young people. So we did a project called the PPAS project, P, physical activity in school sport in Wigan, and we got a little bit of money. We got about £3,000 to support a little bit of equipment and some expenses. But it's a great example of not having a great deal, but harnessing a team. So we had PE, teacher training students, who became researchers, data collectors for their dissertation work. And we ran this project for 2 years, and we collected data from over 600 children, looking at activity, health measures, some psychosocial stuff as well. And in the second year, there was an FMS element from fundamental movement skills, which Lawrence kind of led. So that was great. It was even more great because it allowed us to have all this data, and then we can do lots of different analyses and secondary analyses. And it allowed me to collaborate with lots of different people in order to really exploit the data and look at some different messages in the data. So some kind of a range of papers are looking at some different things around children's school-based activity and health. But of course, coming back to this thing, well, it's okay measuring all this stuff and knowing about the relationships. We really want to see what we can do to change these behaviours. Can we engage children to be more physically active? Lots of different ways to do this, but the systematic reviews, which we might use as our go-to source, one in 2007 and then a few years later, both confirmed what they call multicomponent approaches, which involve schools and families and children, were most important perhaps to do that. So we were fortunate at the time to have a very, very fortunate because the Dean of Faculty in Education where I was, we got our REF funding at that time in 2008-9 it was, and they basically divert the funding back to the people who had actually contributed to the submission. So that was a real nice model for me and 2 colleagues to kind of pool our funding. We engaged 3 postgraduate students. We had a bank of volunteers in there. We had colleagues, academics across education and exercise science schools working together. And we pulled together a curriculum-based, if you like, intervention, which also had a family component through homework and a training component in terms of teacher training. Call it the Change Project. That's Gerald, by the way, the caterpillar. That's why, but it is. And we wanted to really try and promote healthy weight in the children and young people through these things. So engage them in more activity, reducing sedentary behaviour, and also healthy eating as well. Out in school, education element, children enjoyed that. They loved coming into the sport and exercise science laboratories as well. So again, this kind of link between the two, education and exercise science, was really live here. Some cutting edge technologies to measure some of the health parameters, and then field-based testing as well. So it was a real full-on project. Those of us who are in the room who were involved in that would be testament to that. We've probably aged a little bit since it, but it was successful in the sense that we had a positive outcome in terms of it was effective. The children's body size reduced across waist circumference and body mass index. But also in terms of a model for, if you like, setting it up. So we had a formative phase where we explored what was going on with the children. We had some methodological work in there. We had some subsample stuff more around the physiology of it, which is still going on in terms of some of the writing. And we had the evaluation of the project itself. So we kind of ticked a lot of boxes, and that's a nice model. I think we've found that going forward to try and set our interventions up in such a way where we have a kind of nice follow-on approach to tell the story. Okay, we are getting to the close now, so I can see a little bit of fidgeting there from you two in particular, so we'll try and move on. So this is about really, I guess, one of the things that's struck home to me is the importance of collaborations and multidisciplinary collaboration. So from a science point of view, like the Change Project was a great example. We couldn't have done that without a mix of exercise scientists all bringing their skills to the table. But similarly, it involved lots of people who were at the education side, from local authority to head teachers to class teachers to coordinators who brought that all together. And so that link is really there for me. And so it's a really important message, which I've learned, and I hope, people will kind of take this on board in the right spirit, that we've got to do this with other people. We can't do it together. We're not going to get very far with trying to research in isolation. Impact is really important. So I'm just kind of jump forward a little bit. So for those in the room don't know about this, so universities get government funding on a cycle basis for research quality, and one of the things we need to demonstrate is the impact, real-world impact of the research. So a lot of the projects I've just been talking about, and other projects which I've been fortunate enough to be involved in, such as sports links and active play, were the underpinning research for this impact case study that I wrote for the JMU ref return. And this was judged at 4-star, which was, I forget the actual term that we use for this one. I'll just find it in my notes, so I don't want to be misrepresented here. Outstanding in terms of reach and significance. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reach beyond our academic world and trying to make a change. So that, for example, the Wigan work, that was fed into policy and practice and future commissioning of services that was informed by the research work that we did. Right, so to finish off, some reflections then, I guess, over this 15-year time course. Firstly, PE's role in promoting activity and health. Well, in this time, we've seen different governments. We've seen statutory curriculum time, if you like, removed. We've seen central funding removed and infrastructures removed. So that always creates a challenging environment. The role of the PE teacher, is that really going to change? Well, interestingly, maybe midpoint for this period in the States, who were talking about the PE teacher's role being more holistic, the school activity director, kind of running all these kind of different multifaceted programs. And then more recently, and so this has been piloted this year in the UK by Nuffield Foundation, a head of wellbeing post in secondary schools. That's quite a different departure. So maybe the role is maybe slightly different. Has promotion of activity changed a lot? I think there are pockets, and I think there are initiatives like some of the stuff the Youth Sport Trust tried to do, but I think on the whole it's probably not changed a great deal. I think some people are very proactive and others are less so. The measurement of activity, though, undoubtedly has become more sophisticated. We hopefully try and compare data from studies a little bit more easily now, but still there's no consensus about how we deal with that information, how we deal with that data. So we're not really getting any further forward in that respect. What is becoming more true now is that we get people like computer scientists involved in this kind of work, and so how we measure or how we identify intensity and mode of activity is a little bit more behaviourally driven perhaps than other methods that we've used in the past. PE now seen as one aspect or one cog in this element of whole school physical activity promotion, which is probably more appropriate. Much more emphasis on this, the links between activity, fitness and academics and performance. What we can see over time, last few years, is that interventions in schools have limited sustained impact. Lots of impact in the school day, but not so much impact out of school activity. And maybe part of that is because we know less about when children leave school and they go home, what the family and home dimensions are and how that influences the physical activity. And the work Rob's doing and supported by Zoe in particular is kind of really important to try and unpick a little bit more about what goes on at home. And now kind of 2015, so the kind of revolving door, I'm not sure how great an analogy that was, but it seemed a good idea at the time back in June when I had to send the stuff in, means that I've now kind of got an oversight of the PE and school sport programme here at Edgehill. And that's a great opportunity to kind of link in with schools and with students and to try and kind of recreate this kind of team approach to doing some of this research. Also some great collaborative partnerships and networks developed and continue to be developed. So hopefully we'll continue some of this work into the future. Right, so I'm going to start with some thank yous. I'm going to just end with some thank yous as well. So 6:59, right, this has got to be really quick. So I'd like to thank Sue and to Ben and to Jack. So they're the ones who just let me get on with it, and they've probably got a real good view of the back of my head and shoulders and a computer screen a lot of the time. But that's the kind of the way that it kind of goes. So I really appreciate the fact that no one ever complains, just let me get on with it. And you know, it's kind of what makes me happy and it keeps me out of trouble, and that's the important thing, I guess, isn't it? And for Ben and Jack, you know, got this professor stuff and it's banded around quite a bit, but they're the ones who keep me keep me grounded, because I'm just dad, and that all the stuff I do at work means absolutely nothing to them. That's the way it should be. So thank you very much for your ongoing support. And I've got a list, and it's probably not long enough, probably forgot, and I apologise if I forgot people, but I've worked with a lot of people over the time. Collaborations, just people who I chat to, support, people from outside academia, networks, people I've published with, etc., etc., etc. Too many to mention, but all of them have had an influence on getting me to this point in my career, and hopefully I can kick on and kind of move a little bit further and move the field forward a little bit as well, and hopefully with the continued help of friends and colleagues in the audience. So I'm going to bring things to a close there, and I think we're done, so thank you.
Okay, well, Stuart has kindly agreed to take some questions, and I'm sure that there are plenty of things that many of you would like to ask, but if you have a question, if you can raise a hand, and you can be patient while we get the microphone to you, so that we can record it with the filming that's going on. So, yeah, we have a question at the front here.
Couldn't people all come in place?
I can probably just hear you.
Well, so I can be the first to say thank you, Stuart, for that excellent lecture. Now, what stood out to me at the start was you raised the go hard or go home type of ethos, which you said you picked up from sport, and that has also enriched and helped you in other areas of your life too. And I can empathise with that, I can identify with it. And I was just wondering if there are, maybe in your opinion, other parts of the school curriculum and other parts of sort of social influence which actually undermine that, really, as a means of promoting self-efficacy in young people?
Possibly. I think very often we're scared to challenge children in particular, and to really get them to try and push themselves as hard as, I don't often mean that in a physical sense all the time. And I think sometimes the hurdle isn't always maybe set high enough to allow children to maybe reach that little bit further up there. I think it's a difficult one, because what we don't want to do is to set people up to fail. But I think that's a fine line between kind of not wanting to do that and giving children a chance to actually go and reach as hard as they can. So from an educational perspective, that's kind of what I sometimes see, I guess. And I think it translates a little bit into other areas as well. So I think we're quite risk averse a little bit in society now. And one of the things about activity in young people is that it is about exploration. And there's clips there with the kids in the trees, for example. And sometimes we sanitize the environment a little bit, and we don't allow kids to kind of go hard, if you like, on their play sometimes, because of fear of what the consequences might be. So I think, yeah, I think that does occur a little bit. I can kind of flip my head a little bit, and as a parent, and kind of see the other side of that argument. But for me, it is important, and I think it's something to set people on the right track. And be as good as you can be, basically. If you're going to do it to the best of your ability, and that's the kind of philosophy that I want to try and get over, not just on a personal level, but also, there's some research students in the room today, and kind of get that message over to them as well.
Okay, yeah, at the back.
Hi, Steve. Great presentation. Just takes me back. Great picture of a tracksuit there. It's free, by the way, if anybody wants it. Anyway, lots of the work looking back, maybe over the past 10 or 15 years, was set in an environment that's now rapidly changing. So the background now is largely driven by the virtual environment for children. So there's only an article recently in the paper which one primary school teacher was saying, children no longer have the finger fitness to hold a pen for long enough to write sentences on their page just as they enter primary school, or in this case, when they're 5 or 6 years of age. So what do you think that the pros and cons are for some of these technologies, the games, the iPads, etc.? Because they're a double-edged sword, I guess, aren't they? In terms of maybe some ideas might promote physical activity, but they don't actually do it when they're using them.
I mean, I think, you know, the work you did and Lee's work with the Nintendo Wii and those kind of things. So it seems quite old now, doesn't it? The stuff like Wii Sports and this idea that it's a video game and you can move about, that's really good for you. And your work obviously showed that it wasn't as beneficial as doing the actual sport itself. And those kind of, I guess, those games have moved on. And I think in terms of the field, what I've not really talked about today is I guess, sedentary behaviour and efforts to kind of reduce that. So a lot of the time, children will spend being sedentary and involved in screen-based media. There's an argument to say that maybe playing video games in a social kind of context. So a lot of the video games now are online, and there's a degree of communication and competition there, and that's sometimes maybe a little bit better than sat in isolation, watching TV, munching a bag of crisps. So there's kind of that maybe perspective. In terms of promoting activity, I think the potential definitely is there, and these things are happening, aren't they? So we can get a fitness app on our phone, and we can use that to guide our training. But what we know from those kind of things, typically they're not underpinned by behavioural change theory. So the little bit may be faddy or novelty and short-lasting. So I don't know. I'd like to think, because the technology is so pervasive, that it is going to be really useful. But I'm not like seeing, as far as I've read, a great deal of evidence from that. Big study, Dave Lubin's study, the Atlas study, they had phone apps. They had the right target audience. This is in Australia. They had adolescent boys worked into this, but they didn't see great effects in terms of activity promotion. So, and some of the stuff I've seen around using Facebook as a kind of social group, social support, again, not great evidence. So I think it is there to be used and tried and tested, but I've not seen evidence to see that it's really enough to replace some of the things that we know that maybe work in terms of social support, getting the physical environment right, creating opportunities and so on and so forth.
Okay, do we have any further questions? Come on, don't be modest. Don't be shy. Anyone else? No? Okay, well, I'm sure Stuart will be very happy to take questions more informally outside over a glass of wine or two. But before then, my name's Kevin Burney. I'm an Associate Dean in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And it's really my great privilege and pleasure this evening to give the vote of thanks to Stuart for his lecture. As Stuart mentioned, impact is really one of the prime concerns for all of us who work in academia today. In other words, that our research should be relevant to the needs of present-day British society, and it should help inform and improve the way that all of us as citizens think, act and behave. And certainly by those standards, it's really difficult to think of any topic more important than his lecture this evening. We only have to look at recent warnings by Sally Davis, the Chief Medical Officer, about the growing dangers of obesity. I know she highlighted women, but I'm sure it's just as important for men as well. And also, too, of course, to the other side, there's the campaigns by the likes of Jamie Oliver and others for imposing sugar taxes on the foods that we eat. And diet is, of course, very important, but I guess as we all know, especially at this time of year, controlling what we eat isn't always easy. And in any case, it is only one half of the equation. Just as important, if not more so, is the amount of physical exercise that we all undertake. And if we are going to inculcate in the generations of the future good habits about taking physical exercise, I think, as Stuart has really very ably demonstrated, the place to begin is at school level. And I'm sure all of us, watching that CARES extract, or certainly many of us, at that age, thinking back to our own schooling, really think about both the negative and the positive ways that it's maybe influenced us later on in adult life. It really is one of the most formative influences in the way that we will all ultimately develop as adults. And certainly I think that's demonstrated particularly in Stuart's case, his commitment and love of sport that he developed in school, and also his dedication to hard work, are really reflected in the fact that he is today the author of more than 80 published peer review articles. You only saw a small proportion of there up on screen during the lecture. And also in Stuart's ongoing work with both children in Alderhay, but also with schools in Merseyside in West Lancashire to promote physical education at school level. So it really is a case of planning and developing for the needs of the generations of the future. But for now, before we partake of those refreshments that we do have available outside, I'd like to invite you all to join me in thanking Stuart once again for what I think you will agree is an informative and really stimulating and thoughtful lecture.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. Thank you.